On this Sunday night, a second evacuation attempt in southern Ukraine thwarted by Russian forces. A commercial airport is hit, and reports civilians are targeted.
Russia killed our children, our parents.
While protests and arrests across Russia grow, Americans take a stand.
I would rather support Ukraine in whatever we can.
The vast majority say they're willing to take a financial hit to help, while the U.S. government considers two strategic steps: refugee crisis. As the Prime Minister heads to Europe, what will Canada do to help? And Ukrainian Canadians roll up their sleeves, raising money.
There's something soothing about it, having the dough in your hands and making it.
By pinching pierogies.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. As the Russian army closes in on the capital of Ukraine, we begin tonight with a warning. The footage we are about to show you is disturbing. Panicked civilians are trying to escape heavy shelling in nearby cities, but Ukrainian officials are saying Russian soldiers are targeting people trying to get out. This is the chaos that followed a blast in the city of Irpin, a suburb of Kyiv. Shells exploded near people attempting to flee. A New York Times reporter who witnessed the attack says at least 3 members of a family were killed, 2 of them reportedly children. Across Ukraine tonight, the situation for civilians is critical. In some regions, there's no escaping the violence. David Aiken has our top story.
This is Irpin, a residential suburb of the Ukraine capital, Kyiv, under intense attack. Civilians grab what they can and flee. Grandmothers in wheelchairs, babes in arms. Independent media organizations say the Russian attack resulted in civilian deaths. Meanwhile, inside Kyiv, Ukrainian forces build up their defensive positions, including installing anti-tank hedgehogs. Far away from the front lines, in the central Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia, smoke and flames after the civilian airport there is destroyed.
А що тепер? Бомби проти Одеси.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said it was hit by 8 Russian cruise missiles. In Mariupol, in the southeast, Russian shells and rockets have been pounding residential areas for nearly a week. For the second day in a row, Russian officials promise a ceasefire to let these buses evacuate civilians. But for the second day in a row, the ceasefire is broken. Mariupol City Council blames the Russians. The Russians, with no evidence, blame Ukrainian nationalists. Those arriving in refugee camps at Ukraine's borders say all the more reason for NATO forces to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
We really want that NATO close sky on Ukraine, because Russia killed our children, our parents.
And these are all scenes the Kremlin wants none of its citizens to see or even know about. More than 3,500 were arrested Sunday at protests across Russia. They joined thousands of Russian scientists petitioning Putin to stop. But independent media outlets have been silenced. Foreign journalists threatened with jail. And social media sites are blocked by a government pulling its citizens behind a new digital Iron Curtain. David Aiken, Global News.
The city of Lviv in western Ukraine has been spared from fighting so far. It's become a hub for refugees heading west on their way to neighboring countries like Poland. At the same time, it's also become a staging area for supplies and weapons heading east into the fighting. Our Mike Armstrong is in Lviv.
Sunday Mass is something that happens every week. These weeks it feels different. Father Pavlo Drodziak says looking out at his parishioners, he can tell they're tired.
It's 11th day of war. All of us is so scared because we don't know what does it mean war. Now we know.
The people in St. George's Cathedral on this day have been dealing with air raid sirens and checkpoints But so far the actual fighting hasn't come here. Yet. No one thinks it can't. Many think it will. This woman tells us what Vladimir Putin is doing is terrible. She asks how her beautiful country can be destroyed. For the people who came to Mass on this date, there was a message. They were told to do what they can to help. Prayer alone isn't enough.
We believe in God, and also we believe in our country. But we need to do something. Believe without doing it's nothing.
This woman has been weaving camouflage covers for hiding vehicles and says everyone is mobilized. She came to church today, she says, not to pray for herself, but for everyone she knows. There is a pressure in this city, almost an extra emotional weight. There's worry about what might come and worry about friends and family in other parts of the country. There are also families that have been split up. This woman tells us she sent her children to Poland while this couple left their home on the first day of the war.
When we were exiting Kyiv, we hear bombs, but not so comfortable feeling when you pack just one backpack.
And you don't know where to go, what to do, you just leave.
Now, that cathedral we visited is going to be doing something tomorrow they haven't done since the Second World War. Father Drodziak told us they're going to be taking down statues and artwork in case there's bombing. They're going to be wrapping it and moving it into the basement. Colleen?
Mike Armstrong in Lviv, Ukraine. Thanks, Mike. The U.S. and Western allies are promising to unleash another round of punishing sanctions against Russia this week. And the Biden administration is in talks with Poland's government to find a way to get fighter jets to Ukraine after NATO refused to do that and said no to a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Jennifer Johnson has more.
With forces battling on the ground, Ukraine is begging the U.S. and its allies for more firepower in the sky. Now the Biden administration is negotiating with Poland to give Ukraine its old Soviet-made MiG fighter jets and replace them with U.S.-made F-16s.
We're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians.
Blinken visited Moldova, a Western-leaning former Soviet republic, pledging U.S. aid as that small nation bordering Ukraine fears it could be Putin's next target. Pressure is building across America and in Congress for the Biden administration to do more to destabilize Russia. This weekend, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal stopped doing business in that country. The White House vows more sanctions against Russia are coming to dial up the heat.
The ruble is worth less than a penny right now. The Russian central bank is not functioning completely. The stock market has been closed.
A new poll shows 80% of Americans are also calling for the U.S. to stop buying Russian oil, despite gas prices at their highest level in a decade.
I would rather support Ukraine in whatever we can. If that means gas prices hike up, I would pay it.
But experts warn the ripple effect of targeting Russian crude oil exports will be costly.
Anything that touches a truck, commerce, deliveries, groceries, lumber, going to the store, anything that is being shipped via semi-truck is eventually going to get hit.
It's a price the majority of Americans say they are willing to pay to try and help save Ukraine. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is visiting a number of European countries this week to discuss the situation in Ukraine and how allies can help. Abigail Beeman is traveling with the Prime Minister. Abigail, there are calls for Canada and other Western allies to do more. What are you hearing?
Colleen, the first stop is here in London, and according to a senior government source, it's less a question of will Canada do more to help Ukraine, but more a question of what Canada will do, and that's the goal of this trip, figure out what to do next to push back on Russia. Monday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sits down with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. It's one of a series of meetings Johnson has planned with world leaders this week. Trudeau's office says the leaders will discuss building on their coordinated response to Russia's unjustifiable military aggression, but government officials won't share exactly what kind of proposals may be on the table, just that they're aiming for maximum impact. Over the weekend, the UK announced a 6-point plan to tackle Russia, and new legal measures to sanction oligarchs head to Parliament Monday. Russia, meanwhile, singled out the UK in its condemnation of Western support for Ukraine, referring to sanctions hysteria and promising tough retaliatory measures. Last week, Canada announced different sanctions against Russia nearly daily, as well as aid for Ukraine. The big question now is what comes next and what will actually work. Another important focus of this trip, the humanitarian crisis underway as more than 1 million Ukrainians flee. That will be top of mind during Trudeau's time in Poland this week, where hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have crossed the border, as Canada promises to make it easier for Ukrainians to reach our country too. Colleen?
Abigail Beeman in London. Abigail, thank you. As Abigail mentioned, the UN warns Europe is facing its fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War and fears some 4 million people may flee Ukraine. The UNHCR says more than 1.5 million people have left Ukraine in the last 10 days. The humanitarian push to help is huge, but as Redmond Shannon reports, with so many people trying to get out, neighboring countries are asking for more help.
Amid the carefree smiles, some frightened glances too. These orphans arrive in western Ukraine after 24 hours on a train. Next up, a bus to Poland. For the orphanage director, it's unbearable.
My heart is being torn apart. I feel so sorry for these children. They are so young.
The 215 children had been living close to the nuclear power plant attacked by Russian troops on Friday.
I don't understand why the Russian people cannot believe that we are being bombarded.
In the south, women and children cross the Danube, escaping to Romania with whatever they can carry.
Like, our family was basically torn apart because I had to leave my parents and my husband at home.
A cold day, but a warm welcome into the European Union.
No one in Ukraine expected this to happen. We were just minding our own business, and then suddenly all of this just like avalanched on us.
In contrast to the divisive Syrian refugee crisis, the EU has quickly agreed to temporarily give Ukrainians full rights to live and work in the bloc. Exactly the type of Western integration Vladimir Putin doesn't want to see. The UN is calling this the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II.
If people stay here for a long period of time, there will have to be other countries offering places to host refugees, even outside Europe.
Of the 1.5 million refugees so far, more than half are in Poland. Other destinations include Hungary, Slovakia, and the small and relatively poor nation of Moldova. Moldova's president says her country urgently needs help with the influx. With Russian troops making advances, the UN says it expects that number of 1.5 million to rise sharply in the coming days. Colleen?
Redmond Shannon in London. Redmond, thank you. Coming up, growing calls for those responsible for residential school deaths to answer for their crimes. This month, the Northern Alberta community of Capoweno First Nation revealed 169 potential unmarked graves have been discovered near the site of the former St. Bernard Indian Residential School, just the latest in a growing list of such sites. The searches and discoveries are a necessary step towards uncovering the truth of Canada's painful past. But what about accountability? Some of these deaths were criminal, and there are growing calls for those responsible to pay for the crimes. Heather Urex-West reports.
The first discoveries of unmarked graves near residential school sites grabbed the attention of the world. But Indigenous communities knew there would be more, and there have been. From 215 in Kamloops to 751 in Cowessess, 93 in Williams Lake, 54 in Kiskus, and this week 169 in Capoweno.
As the number of children found in graves continues to climb, we see it was never about erasing who we are, but eradicating us altogether, genocide.
The Alberta grave sites were found using ground-penetrating radar, but archival records support another chilling truth. Some of the children who died here were infants.
The question that used to arise was, well, where did those babies come from? And you know, like the survivors talked about the abuse, the sexual abuse in those schools.
Each of these children was a beloved part of a family, and no one has been held accountable for their deaths.
Even though over the years survivors have recounted countless criminal acts, few people have faced justice.
There needs to be widespread investigations about how these children died and the circumstances around how they died, but then also who were the people who were responsible for their deaths.
Unfortunately, it often seems like until there's actual proof within, a government or a church record, it's as if those stories, never happened.
It's why the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation continues to call for the release of all historical records related to not only residential schools, but Indian hospitals as well.
Our little warriors have waited to find them, and now we will ensure they rest in peace.
But for every painful discovery so far, Indigenous community members know there are more children waiting to be found. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
Ahead, the new program designed to give Black Canadian families a leg up to home ownership.
You're watching Global National.
A new program to help more Black families break into the housing market has been launched in Toronto. The average home ownership rate for Black households in Canada is about 40% compared to the overall rate of nearly 70%. And the Shared Equity Initiative is the first of its kind in Canada. And as Anne Gaviola reports, if it's successful, it'll expand to other Canadian cities.
Oh, it would mean legacy. It would mean financial security. It would mean stability, and it would mean something to pass on to my children rather than my bills.
Regina Magambo dreams of home ownership. The single mother of 3 young children is a small business owner. Her hair extension and beauty product retail business was hit by COVID restrictions, reducing her annual household income to $65,000. She pre-qualified for a $600,000 mortgage, but says that isn't enough to afford a home for her family in this ultra-competitive market.
You just never know what the cost of a home is until after a bidding war happens.
The average selling price for a home in the GTA is now $1.3 million. The Black North Home Ownership Bridge program brings together developers willing to offer dedicated homes at a discount and funding from charities and government, including $10 million from Ottawa. The Shared Equity program provides support towards a down payment and lower monthly mortgage payments for 200 families with young children to own a home in the GTA. Black North is currently accepting applicants and in discussion with donors.
Our objective is to raise about $65 million, and that will help us because we want to create not only in the GTA and the Greater Toronto area, but we want to take this program right across Canada.
The program involves twin mortgages, one from a traditional lender, a bank or a credit union, to be paid off in full first. The second loan is with Black North to bridge the affordability gap.
We are building a different playbook at how to address anti-Black racism, and we wanted to build a program that was going to create wealth and that was going to create mobility for the Black community.
Magambo says home ownership would be transformational for her family for generations to come.
It would create opportunities for my children in the future. So that means the world to me. It lets me know that I wouldn't be working in vain, but that I would be working towards something.
Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, pinching pierogies to help the victims of war. In communities across the country, Ukrainian Canadians are coming together to pinch pierogies, or perohe, as my Ukrainian mother taught me. They're making the food to raise money for victims of war. And as Carolyn Curry de Castillo tells us, the humble pierogi has a history of helping.
They sing a traditional Ukrainian song of resistance while preparing a food that's nourished so many generations in Ukraine.
Potatoes and usually with fried onions. My favorite are though with sauerkraut. Those pierogies, yeah. Favorite, all-time favorite, but we make them only for usually Christmas time.
Volunteers at Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in Calgary assembling thousands of pierogies and selling them to raise money for relief efforts.
Making the pierogi is very soothing. There's something
something soothing about it, having the dough in your hands and making it.
Christine Musienko is the daughter of Ukrainian immigrants. Every day she talks to relatives who are now in bomb shelters.
It's my last phone call when I go to sleep. It's my first phone call when I wake up.
There is a long tradition of Ukrainian Canadians shaping pierogies to raise money.
Last year we had a fundraiser for our church and we made over $60,000 selling pierogies. This church was built from women making pierogies. We used to make them every Sunday.
Oksana David thinks not only about her relatives who were enduring this war, but those who suffered the horror of the 1930s in her homeland. She worries about possible shortages now in the breadbasket of Europe and how quickly a situation of food abundance can change anywhere.
And I can't believe that people in Ukraine, in a land that's so rich and can feed, whole Europe, people could be starving like they were starving 90 years ago when Stalin was trying to basically extinguish Ukrainian people.
Making a food that goes back centuries, allowing those in Calgary helplessly wringing their hands to put them to work, helping from afar. Carolyn Curry de Castillo, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight, we leave you with support and solidarity for Ukraine in sports and on the streets. From Montreal to Toronto, people across Canada rallied outside Russian consulates calling for peace.
A lot of nods to the crisis in Ukraine.
And in Vancouver, Major League Soccer fans watching the Whitecaps waved Ukrainian flags while players wore T-shirts with the words, "We stand with Ukraine," during the warm-up. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen will be back tomorrow.